So my wife and I were at her family's house for dinner. Everybody's talking, laughing, telling stories. It feels like every other family gathering. Then I started noticing something. Every time my wife started talking, somebody talks over her. Not in a mean way, just like they were so used to doing it, like they didn't even realize it anymore. A few minutes later, her aunt asks everybody a question. My wife starts answering. Before she can finish, someone else jumped in. The conversation keeps moving. Nobody circles back to her. I catch her expression for just a second. She smiles, but it looks like practice, like she smiled through this 1,000 times before. On the drive home, I ask, "Did you notice they kept interrupting you?" She shrugs. "They've always done that." I said, "Doesn't that bother you?" She smiled and said, "You get used to it." Man, that answer bothered me more than the interruptions because nobody should get used to feeling unheard. A few weeks later, we back over there again. Same house, same people, same conversations. My wife starts sharing a story. And just like before, someone cuts her off. This time, before anyone else could keep talking, I smiled and said, "Hold on for a second. I want to hear what my baby got to say." The whole room paused. Everybody looked back at my wife. She finished her story. People laughed. They asked her questions. The conversation kept going. That was it. No argument, no lecture, no awkward moment. Just one sentence. On the ride home, she reached over and grabbed my hand. And she said something I'll never forget. "You know what's crazy?" I said, "What?" She smiled and said, "Nobody's ever done that for me before." Man, I had to look out the windshield for a moment because I almost teared up because it hit me. She had spent her whole life adjusting to being interrupted that she forgot what it felt like to be heard. And all it took was one person who loved her enough to make sure her voice was heard. Sometimes loving your spouse isn't speaking up for them. Sometimes it's making sure the world finally listens when they speak.
Hey, shout out to him, man. Shout out to this great husband and aka the content creator. But listen, beautifully said, beautifully articulated it. Just a beautiful story about why it's so important to protect your wife, right? And the most brilliant thing about this story, right, is he didn't say I had to fight for her in a sense of like anything physical or I had to cut somebody out. I had to have some words to somebody very negative. It didn't get to that point. And this is what I feel like true masculinity is, right? Protecting the ones you love without it having to be always anything so aggressive, right? See, real man, we understand something called tact. You understand? You can move when you have a sense of self, right? You don't have to be boastful about, hey, everybody stop talking, stop cutting her off. Hey, go ahead and finish, baby. You ain't got to do all that. You understand? He was very polite about it. He went about it very gracefully, with a soft hand, right? And it was just beautifully said, man. And I just think that here's another thing if I carry on with the story. The fact that he was able to recognize it, you understand? And he was able to reflect back to her like, hey, I noticed that every time you speak, you're being cut off for being able to finish your thought, being able to, to finish your story, whatever. And her response was, yeah, that's how it is. People always do that. And he took it upon himself like, okay, that's noted. Let me put a pin in that. Right. So next time I'm going to stand up for her. Right. And fast forward, like he said, a few weeks later, same people, same situation. She gets telling her story. She tried to get cut off. He had to intervene. And I just think it was just beautiful, man. And the last point of that is on the car ride home, he was just saying how, she actually took the time to thank him, you know, and to let him know how grateful that she was. And that type of gratefulness and that type of protection, she noticed like, okay, yeah, I picked the right man. You know, I picked the right husband. I picked the right man to protect me, not only physically, but emotionally. Because that's really what it was. You follow me? That's really, he protected her emotionally, because she could have felt, and the whole time before he met her, obviously, she said it was happening for years. And hey, that's just always what they do. She always probably felt small in those situations. She felt little in those situations. Again, she felt like her voice was never being heard in a room where, she probably did have something very intelligent to say, something that can add value to the conversation. But because there were bigger voices or bigger egos in the room, she needed somebody who was strong enough to stand in front of her and then, open a space for her to be heard. And again, I just think that was very beautiful of him as the husband, as someone who really loves her sincerely and deeply, because he didn't have to. He could have been like, man, that's her family. You know what I'm saying? They're just what they do. That's just who they are. But he's like, no, family or not, this is my wife. This is somebody I love. This is somebody I stand for. I'm going to stand on business with. And as she got to talking and someone tried to cut off, you like, hold on. I want to hear what my baby got to say. Right? She was able to finish her story. She added value. She added substance to it. What he said, people laughed. People asked her questions. So now going forward, they're like, I guarantee the family like, man, why didn't we, right? They thinking like, man, she actually do have a lot of good things to say now. So now next time he don't have to do anything. I'm sure, we creatures of habits, and just the flow of conversation. I don't think people intentionally was doing it, right? But I think now going forward in those conversations, as she's talking, people might be cutting the eye at him now to be like, is he gonna say something? We cut her off, you know what I mean? So he got that respect built as well. So I just think it was beautifully said. And I think for him as a husband, man, it's just another way to protect your wife, and I think that, in any situation like that, protect the ones you love, child, mother, sister, whoever. But specifically to the story, he did a great job protecting his wife. Right. And just allowing her to number one, he spoke up for her, and then number two, it allowed her to have her own space to speak, which ultimately, like I said, bro was like, man, I almost shed a tear because, he showed her his value. That's his value that he brings. Right. That's true protection, which is what man's supposed to do. So she did her part by thanking him sincerely. And I know that he loved that, too, because that let him know. See, as men, again, we want respect over love. So if she didn't, and again, I don't know their relationship, but I would have expected as me as a husband for a thank you. I wouldn't have been looking for it, but I would have probably expected it. Right. And so because the fact that she did tell him thank you, that's a level of respect. Right. She respected him for that. And ultimately, that respect was love. So again, man, shout out to the content creator. What a great story. What a great story. Just so many layers in it that I thought was just beautiful and beautifully said. But with that, man, shout out to the content creator. If you got a lot of value out of this video, I'm sure you did. I'm sure you got a lot of value out of this video. Hit the like button, subscribe, and share this video out, because I'm sure there's other men out there and women who need to take heed to this type of message, right? On what protection look like outside of anything physically, right? When it comes to a man and, his one of his responsibilities when it comes to him being a husband and just a man in general. This is how it should be, how we protect in different ways. So, again, with that being said, I appreciate y'all. Much love. Peace.